Stay in your place, Keanu Reeves. This is none of your business. These words were spoken in the legendary jazz club, Blue Note, on that unforgettable night when the Hollywood star decided to intervene in what appeared to be an ordinary conflict. But why did the performance of a budding pianist move the famous actor so deeply? And why did his subsequent actions change the lives of everyone in the room? Stay with us until the end of this story, and you'll discover how one evening can turn lives around, and why sometimes our imperfections are our greatest strength. Friends, this story is one of those rare gems that restores faith in humanity. At the end, I'll tell you why Keanu's actions were especially significant in today's world and what happened to the key figures of this tale a year later. But for now, make yourself comfortable, because this story will touch your heart. Blue Note wasn't always the renowned jazz club we know today. 70 years ago, it was a small basement venue where musicians gathered after their main performances. They didn't come for money or fame. This was a place where they could be themselves, experiment, and share their stories through music. Over time, it gained legendary status. The club's walls absorbed thousands of stories, millions of notes, countless dreams, and disappointments. Old Joe, the bartender who had been working there for 3 decades, loved to recount how Miles Davis himself once walked in. It was a rainy Tuesday night with just 5 people in the audience. Davis didn't take to the stage, he simply sat in a corner, listened to a young trumpeter, and smiled. "You see," Joe would say, "real music doesn't need a big audience. It just needs a sincere heart." That Thursday evening, Keanu Reeves was seated at his favorite corner table. He had been coming here for several months, drawn by the venue's unique atmosphere. As a former bassist of the band Dog Star, he vividly remembered his first performances. The trembling hands, the insecurity, the fear of the audience. Back then, critics weren't particularly kind to his musical experiments. An actor should stick to acting, they wrote. But Keanu knew that music was more than just notes on paper or technically flawless execution. It was a way to tell a story, to share a piece of one's soul. At the piano sat Sophia, a fragile 19-year-old girl in a simple black dress. Her slender fingers trembled slightly as they touched the keys during the instrument's tuning. For her, this evening was special, her first performance after a year of rehabilitation. A car accident had nearly taken away her ability to play, but persistent training and unwavering belief in her dream had helped her regain the mobility of her hands. Sophia's story began long before that evening. At the age of 5, her grandfather first sat her down at his old piano in his apartment. "Music, Sophia," he used to say, "isn't just sounds. It's the language of the soul." Her grandfather was an old-school jazz musician who had spent his life playing in small clubs. He never became famous, but his eyes always sparkled when he sat down at the piano. He taught her to hear music in silence, to find rhythm in the sound of rain, and melody in the rustling of leaves. After the accident, every movement was painful. Doctors told her to forget about music, but Sophia didn't give up. She spent hours rehabilitating her fingers, starting with the simplest exercises, squeezing a rubber ball, stringing beads, and trying to hold a pencil. Every small success gave her hope. At night, she often woke up from phantom pain in her hands, but in the morning, she resumed her exercises. Her grandfather was no longer around, but Sophia often imagined him sitting beside her, encouraging her during those endless hours of recovery. "Music will find a way," she seemed to hear his voice say. "Just give it a chance." Keanu watched Sophia with special attention. In her cautious movements, he recognized something familiar, the same insecurity he had felt when he first picked up a bass guitar. Back in the early 90s, his band Dog Star was just starting out. People came to their concerts mostly out of curiosity, to see the famous actor playing rock. But for him, music was much more than a hobby. It was a way to express things that couldn't be conveyed with words or acting. His notebook held scattered thoughts. "Music isn't a mask we put on. It's what we take off. And there's more truth in imperfection than in polished technique." He recalled his first music teacher, who once said, "Keanu, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Be afraid of not being genuine. Isabella Montgomery entered the hall in her usual manner, measured and regal, like a queen descending to her subjects. Regulars knew the moment well. When the formidable critic appeared, the atmosphere in the room instantly changed. Musicians grew nervous, conversations hushed, and even the waiters moved more cautiously, trying not to draw attention. For 20 years, Isabella had built a reputation as a ruthless judge. Her reviews could elevate an artist to stardom or destroy a career with a single phrase. But few knew her true story. In her youth, she had been called a prodigy, destined for greatness. At her first major concert, all the significant figures of the music world were present. That evening was supposed to mark the beginning of a brilliant career. She remembered every detail of that fateful performance: the heavy velvet curtain, bathed in the warm glow of spotlights, the faint creak of the piano pedal, the rustle of programs in the audience. The first notes of Chopin flowed effortlessly, but then something went wrong. Her fingers began to tremble, the notes blurred, and the music fragmented into isolated sounds. She heard the growing whispers in the audience, saw the puzzled glances. After that, she didn't touch the keys for 20 years. Criticism became her way of staying in music, but now from the other side of the stage. Each time she watched a budding musician perform, she relived her own failure. Her reviews weren't just criticism, they were a means of self-protection, a way to build a wall of thorny words and biting remarks around herself. Sophia began to play. The first notes of Thelonious Monk's Round Midnight floated through the hushed room. This composition held a special place in her heart. Her grandfather often played it in moments of sadness. "You see," he used to say, "Monk wasn't a perfect pianist either. But he poured his soul into his music, and people felt it." Keanu noticed the subtle change in Isabella's face as the first notes played. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? A memory? He had worked with actors long enough to read the slightest changes in expression. Behind the stern critic's mask, he saw something deeply personal, an old wound. When Isabella's piercing voice cut through the music, "This is unbearable. Do you call this jazz?" Keanu felt the tension rise in the room. Sophia faltered, her fingers trembling more visibly. "Young lady, you're not just killing a classic, you're mocking it. Your hands are too stiff for jazz, it's obvious." In that moment, the club's atmosphere shifted. Old Joe froze with a towel in his hands, recalling how many such scenes he had witnessed over the years. An elderly couple in the corner stopped whispering, and a young saxophonist at the bar gripped his glass tighter. A unique tension hung in the air, the kind that comes just before a storm. Sophia froze over the keys, her shoulders slumping. Images of months of rehabilitation flashed before her eyes, endless exercises, joint pain, sleepless nights. She remembered the doctor's words. "Let's hope for the best, but prepare for the possibility that you'll never play like before." She recalled crying into her pillow, then stubbornly working to regain each finger's mobility, celebrating every correctly played chord. Keanu slowly rose from his seat. He knew this feeling, when your art is judged not by what you want to say but by how technically perfect you are. He remembered the critical articles about Dogstar. Dilettantism, amateurism, stick to acting. But music had always been more to him than just a hobby. It was a way to be authentic, a way to express what couldn't be said. "I believe you're mistaken in your judgment." His calm, deep voice broke the silence. All heads turned toward him. Some recognized the famous actor, and surprised whispers rippled through the room. But Keanu paid no attention to this. His gaze was fixed on Isabella. "Jazz isn't just about technique," Keanu continued, slowly approaching the stage. "It's about the story the musician tells. And tonight, we're all hearing a very special story." He stopped near the piano, looking at Isabella with the quiet confidence that only comes with life experience. "Oh, has Keanu Reeves himself decided to teach me a lesson in music criticism?" Isabella's voice dripped with sarcasm, but something in her stance shifted. "Let me remind you that I've dedicated my entire life to studying jazz, not to starring in action movies." Keanu smiled. "You know, I once played in a band too. And the first thing I learned was that music isn't a competition. It's a way to tell your story. He ran his hand along the polished surface of the piano. When I started playing bass guitar, people often told me to stick to acting. But music gave me something acting couldn't, a chance to be completely myself, without a script or a director's instructions. The room grew so quiet that the faint sounds of the street outside could be heard. Old Joe stopped polishing glasses, hanging on to every word. He had witnessed many stories within these walls, but this one was special. Every note we just heard, Keanu continued, was imbued with the performer's personal journey. Did you notice how she started hesitantly but gradually opened up? That's not a technical flaw, it's part of the story. This is the true beauty of jazz, the ability to tell an honest story, even if it's imperfect. He turned to Sophia, his eyes filled with understanding and encouragement. Please tell everyone why. As Madame Montgomery put it, your hands seem stiff. Sophia swallowed the lump in her throat. She looked at her hands, still resting on the keys, hands that doctors had deemed hopeless, hands she had taught to feel music again. A year ago, I was in an accident. The doctors said I might never play again. But music is all I have. I practiced every day until my fingers started to work again. Her voice held no self-pity, just a simple statement of facts. But those words seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls, soaking into the old photographs of jazz legends. Isabella listened, and something in her expression began to change. The mask of the stern critic melted away, revealing something deeply human. She remembered her own trembling hands, her fear of the keys, her journey from performer to critic. Perhaps all this time, she had been judging others for what she feared to face within herself. Every imperfection in your performance, Keanu's voice softened, is a mark of the path you've traveled. It makes the music alive, real. By the way, Thelonious Monk wasn't known for his flawless technique either. But his compositions still touch people's hearts because they have soul. He looked around the quiet room. Do you know what's most important in art? Not the flawless execution, but the ability to touch something inside others. To make them feel, to make them think, maybe even to make them change. In the corner of the room, elderly Ray, a former jazz pianist and now the club's coat check attendant, wiped away a tear. Arthritis had taken away his ability to play 5 years ago, but now, hearing these words, he remembered why he had fallen in love with music. Not for its technical perfection, but for its ability to speak from the heart. Sophia took a deep breath and touched the keys again. This time, the melody flowed more freely, more confidently. Traces of her injury were still evident, but now those imperfections felt like special brushstrokes that made the music more human and sincere. Each note told a story of falling and rising again, of pain and hope, of fear and overcoming it. Isabella Montgomery sat still, absorbed in the music and her own thoughts. For the first time in 20 years, she allowed herself to just listen, without evaluating, without criticizing. And in this music, imperfect yet sincere, she heard echoes of her own unfulfilled dreams. After the performance, a little girl about 10 years old approached the piano with a notebook in her hands. Her name was Lily, and she had been taking piano lessons for 3 years. Every Thursday, she begged her parents to bring her to Blue Note to hear live music. I want to learn to play the piano too. But I'm not very good at it, she whispered, handing her notebook to Sophia. Sophia smiled, remembering herself at that age, just as unsure but full of love for music. She wrote in the notebook, "The most important thing is to believe in your music. Each of us has a unique sound, and that is our strength." Then, after a moment of thought, she added, "P.S. The most beautiful melodies are born from overcoming." Keanu observed the scene from his corner, jotting down a final note in his notebook. In a world obsessed with perfection, the bravest act is allowing yourself to be imperfect. Before leaving, he left a note for Isabella Montgomery. Sometimes we become critics of the very dreams we once had ourselves. Perhaps it's time to sit at the piano again? The next day, Isabella Montgomery sat at the piano in her apartment for the first time in 20 years. Her fingers trembled, much like Sophia's once had, but now she understood. It wasn't weakness, but part of the journey. In the quiet of her living room, she began to play the same Chopin piece that had once shattered her dreams. The music was hesitant, at times inaccurate, but there was something new in it, acceptance of herself and her imperfections. Her first review in years of a performance at Blue Note began with the words, "Last night, I relearned how to listen to music with my heart." Sometimes, it takes a lifetime to realize that true art is measured not by the number of correct notes, but by its ability to touch the soul. On social media, a few blurry photos and short videos of the evening surfaced. Someone captured the moment when Keanu Reeves stood up for the young pianist, and someone else caught the scene of little Lily asking Sophia for an autograph. But the most important part wasn't in these snapshots. It was in the invisible chain of changes set in motion that night. A year later, Blue Note was different. On Thursdays, the room was always full. People came not only to listen to music but to be part of something greater. Isabella Montgomery had opened a small music school 2 blocks away from the club. She called it Imperfect Harmony, and taught children not to fear mistakes and to find their own voice in music. Sophia became one of the teachers, and one of her first students was Lily. Old Ray, despite his arthritis, began giving lectures on jazz history at the school. "You see," he told his students, "jazz wasn't born in conservatories. It was born out of life, out of pain, out of joy, out of imperfection." Sometimes, on especially quiet nights, when the last patrons had left and the waiters were wiping down the tables, you could hear someone playing the piano in Blue Note. It was Isabella. She would come after closing to practice, slowly rediscovering her love for music. Her playing was still hesitant, but it now held something new, sincerity and acceptance of her imperfections. And Keanu. He returned to the club a few more times, always quietly sitting at the same corner table. He didn't interfere or draw attention to himself, simply observing how music and humanity work their small miracles. In one interview, he was asked about this story. He just smiled and said, "You know, sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught by teachers but by those who aren't afraid to show their vulnerability." Blue Note continued its life. New photographs appeared on its walls, including a small picture of Sophia at the piano with a smiling Keanu in the background. Beneath the photo was a simple caption: "Music isn't about striving for perfection, it's about the courage to be yourself." Friends, this story isn't just about an event in a jazz club. It's a reminder that each of us carries our own unique music within. Sometimes we're afraid to share it with the world out of fear of being imperfect. But it's our imperfections that make us special, that make us human. I have an important question for you. Has there been a moment in your life when someone believed in you despite your imperfections? Or perhaps you've been that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire others not to give up. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Ahead, we have many more incredible stories about humanity, kindness, and the strength of the human spirit. And remember, sometimes the most important lessons are taught not by loud words but by quiet actions that come from the heart.